it had a page number on it. Let's see, worksheet 8B, that's a wild guess. Can anybody tell me? Is 8B? Whew, good guess, Hoffbauer. Okay. Worksheet 8B today. Before I do anything else though, while you're finding that, we'll see if I can manage to show you in the Google Classroom. Let's see, in the classwork tab, first of all, if you're absent ever, remember you should be going to the lesson plan and seeing what it is we did today and what the assignment is. If you don't know what the homework is, it's always on this lesson plan, okay? Tonight's homework is a Delta Math assignment. Some people have already done it because it was in Delta Math, so they got it knocked out already. Okay. What's happening here? I want to go back to the classroom. Okay. Here, under important resources, the first one is now request for a retake form. Okay. If you are going to meet me, come in for a retake, just fill this out quick. It does ask you to make your own copy. I think it's a forced copy. I think I made the link so that as soon as you click on it, it's going to say it's making you a copy of this. And then you need to name it with your name so that I know who it's from. It says, what did you do wrong? Tell me what you think happened, okay? And then it says attach. Basically, if you don't want to attach a copy of all your pages and notes and homework, if you just attach or show me a picture of the checklist and then anything that wasn't done the first time around. Does that make sense? Just that little checklist. If it's a 14 out of 14 already, then you're good. If it's a 10 out of 14, show me a picture of the checklist and a picture of whatever you didn't have done the first time. And then corrections. Okay, and you can show me the corrections when you come in if it's easier. You don't have to make pictures of all this, though. I'm thinking some of you got really good at taking pictures last year and putting them into documents. And then if you need more practice, let me know. Okay, this is where you tell me that. All right. So the only way you avoid that is if you have a 4 already and you want to make it into a 5, then I'm assuming that you really already know what you're doing. You just made a little mistake. All right, I'm going back to the slides because I promised you we would do a warm-up. I know we need to do several warm-ups. I'm going to do a quick warm-up on factoring a cubic. 64 x cubed minus 1. The pattern you would look for is a cubed minus b cubed equals, and this would be on the quiz or on the board. Okay, I just promised you I'd try to do one of these every day till we got good at it. Does anybody know what the cubed root of 64 is? It is 4. And the cubed root of x cubed would be x. The cubed root of 1 is 1. And the SOAP stands for you keep the same sign in this first parenthesis. And now we're going to follow this pattern up here to fill in the next parenthesis. It says you take a that was here and you square it. So what is 4x squared? Be careful, it's 4x times 4x, so it is 16x squared. Everybody good? In the middle, you do an a times a b. Well, this is our a and this is our b, so 4x times 1 is just a 4x. Don't worry about the signs. There's a special rule for the signs. B squared, okay? B is 1, so 1 squared is 1. And then the rule for the signs is it is the same in this parenthesis as what we started with. The opposite is the next sign, and the last sign is always positive. I'm going to do one more warm-up today. I'm going to take this question and change it into standard form, because I think that's an issue for some of you. For standard form, you cannot have fractions. So I could choose, doesn't matter when you do it, but I'll multiply through by a 3. So I get 3y minus 2x, whoops, equals, 2x minus 21. Then the rule is x and y need to be on the same side. So I will subtract 2x over to this side. I'll have a negative 2x plus a 3y. Left on the right is a negative 21. Am I done? Is that standard form? No, silly rule about you can't have a negative, so I'm going to change all the signs on everything. You can't have a negative x. So it would become 2x minus 3y equals 21. Tomorrow, I'll do one where we start with a point and a slope, okay? Because that was messing some of you up. All right, but we're 5 minutes in and we haven't started the lesson. Ready? Everybody okay? Okay. So today we're going to start with solving quadratics, things with x squareds. The first ones we're going to talk about are things where you can just square root. This is really just solving for x, and then at the very end we're going to need to square root. There's no x here on the 5, so we're just going to add it over, so like term over here. So we get 3x squared equals 21. Then what? Using your Algebra 1 skills, you're just going to say I need to divide. And you need to divide before you can square root. You want the x by itself or the quantity that's squared by itself before you square root. So this doesn't come out nice. Okay, we're going to leave it in terms of a square root. Now, you probably don't know this, but when you square root this, the answer is actually this. Teachers don't ever teach you that. What they do teach you is that when you square root, you have to remember plus or minus. Does that sound familiar? Okay. It's because a squared quantity means there are two possible solutions. Some of you understand what this is saying. The absolute value of x is square root of 7, which means the x could have been positive or negative. Okay. You don't have to write this out. You just have to remember that whenever you square root an x, it can be positive or negative. So the answer is x equals plus or minus square root of 7, or you could list it as square root of 7 and negative square root of 7, but you don't have to. This is fine with me. Okay. This I'm going to write, this was the fancy way of explaining why that works, but we don't need to do that. Yes. You would just need to square root and tell me the answer is plus or minus square root of 7. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah. All right, on number 2, this is a quantity squared. We could do this a really long and complicated way. The answer is not this. Does everybody remember that x minus 3 quantity squared is not x squared plus 9? You cannot distribute an exponent across addition and subtraction. If we had to do that, don't write this down because we're not going to do this at all. But do you remember you would have to FOIL this all out and you'd get an x squared minus 6x plus 9? Okay, we're not going to go there. Because this entire quantity is squared, we're just going to square root. Because everything is already in a square, we're just going to square root both sides. Now, as soon as we square rooted something that had an x, we have to remember the plus or minus. So on this side, I'm going to write x minus 3, square root, squared, cancel each other out. And over here, I have to remember plus or minus square root of 5. Now, those parentheses mean nothing. So what is the only thing I have left to do to get that x by itself? I need to add 3. So I have x equals, over here I have a positive 3 and a plus or minus the square root of 5, and I cannot combine those. They're not like terms. So if you were writing them out, 3 plus the square root of 5 and 3 minus the square root of 5 are your two answers. I never write them out. I'm just telling you, if anybody's teacher ever made them write them out, that's what it would look like. So far, so good? All right. Number 3, I think, is a little bit trickier, but don't do any extra work. This one always causes trouble for students. They wanted, first of all, can you distribute this 3? Order of operations say you would have to get rid of what first? The exponent. You'd have to square it first. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Okay? Nobody wants to have to do that. There's a better way to do this. If we just for 1 minute treat this parenthesis as a quantity, just ignore what's in there, okay? It says 3 squared minus 10 equals 65. What does your Algebra 1 brain tell you to do first? Add 10. Now I have 3 somethings equals 75. What does your Algebra 1 brain tell you to do when you have 3 somethings equals 75? Divide by 3. Now, does this look like the last problem? Now we can square root. We need to remember that it had an x in it, so we need a plus or minus. What's the square root of 25? I need to subtract 2 over to this side. So I have a -2 plus or minus 5. I will let you leave a lot of things in pre-calc, but I will not let you leave that, okay? You need to tell me what those 2 numbers are. What is a -2 plus 5? 3. And a -2 minus 5 is a -7. Now, I don't want you to write any of this down, but I'm going to do super fast math for you. X plus 2 times x plus 2 would have been x squared plus 4x plus 4 if you did it correctly. Then there was a 3 out there, so you would have had 3x squared plus 12x plus 12. Then there was a minus 10, and then there was a 65. So you would have had 3x squared plus 12x plus 2 equals 65. Has to equal 0 before you can factor. So you subtract 65. Then you would need to factor out a 3. And what did I do wrong? I did something wrong. This was a -10. Anybody seeing my mistake? Is 2, right? Did I do something wrong? Oh, 3. This is 21. That's what I did wrong. Right? When you divide a 3 out of 63, you get 21. Okay. I was good until the last step. And then I would have had a 3 out here. This would factor x plus 7, x minus 3. And then I would have got, this one is 3 and this one is -7. Okay. What are the chances that you would do this correctly without making a mistake versus just square rooting? Is it better this way? Okay. So look for a quantity squared and just square root. You do have to isolate the quantity first, okay? Don't do this because you will probably make a mistake somewhere like I did. All right, moving on. The second thing is completing the square. I want you to see completing the square. I am going to put one easy completing the square on the quiz, okay? You should have seen this in both Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, but it's a painful process you may not remember, okay? It goes like this. When you have x squared plus bx, you move the other over to the other side, so you have a c over there. Then you do x plus b over 2, and you have to put, wait a minute, I didn't write that well. And you put a blank on each side. Does anybody remember this now that I say you put the blank on each side? And then you square this quantity. And then you get a perfect square. Okay? Let's do a practice one, and I think you'll remember. So we write x squared plus 6x plus blank equals 7 plus blank. Then you take half of the b. The b is the 6 right here. So we end up with x plus, what is half of b? 3. And we say this is a quantity squared. We are trying to factor this. We need it to be a perfect square. So after we take half of this, we go back up here and we write it as a square. So 3 times 3 is 9. Because now those are equivalent. What we have factors x plus 3x plus 3. Okay? What we have here factored that way, and that's how that works. If you don't understand how it works, all you got to know is you take half of the b, and then you square it and put it in the blank. And then the rules of algebra apply. We're on worksheet 8B, okay? Whatever we did to the left, we got to do to the right. So if I put a plus 9 in the blank on the left, on the right I got to put a plus 9. And then 7 plus 9 is 16. Now, yes, this problem would have been easily solved by factoring, but you're going to have to show me that you know completing the square on the quiz, okay? The next step would be we square root each side. We end up with an x plus 3, and because we had an x that we were square rooting, we have to remember plus or minus. Square root of 16 is 4. We need to subtract 3 over there. So we end up with a negative 3 plus or minus 4, which would be, let's see, negative 3 plus 4 is 1. Negative 3 minus 4 is a negative 7. So either one of those answers would work if we went back and plugged them in. All right, the only thing different about number 5, and this is the kind I'm going to put on the quiz, is like 4 or 5. I'm not going to put an icky one, okay? The only thing is it might turn out with square root at the end instead of nice numbers like that one. But this one, you would put the blank on each side. X squared minus 10x plus blank equals 11 plus blank. Then what's the next step? You're trying to factor this, and it would be x, and it's half of b. This time you've got to worry about the sign because b is actually negative 10. So what's half of that? Minus 5. Now if you square that, what is a negative 5 times a negative 5? Positive 25. And we're going to add it to both sides. So again, the process, if you want to write it up here, it's x squared plus bx. Then we took half of that. We did b divided by 2. Then we took that b divided by 2 and squared it and put it in the blank on both sides. And then whatever mess this becomes as a nice number is what goes here. So 11 plus 25 is 36. Now, if that had been like a 37, we would just end up with plus or minus square root of 37, okay? But this one happens to have a nice square root. So we get x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. X equals 5 plus or minus this, 5 plus or minus 6. I don't know where I'm coming up with a square root. We already got rid of that. Which would be what? 11 and negative 1. Did I do that right, guys? So completing the square might need to go on our list of things we practice every day between now and the next quiz. All right, I have one miserable one, and I do hereby solemnly swear I will not put it on the quiz, okay? This is miserable. The first step is not miserable. What's the first step? We need to do what? Anybody remember? Yeah, we need to move the 4 to the other side. Whoops, I forgot the 1 on the 13 already. X squared plus 13x. I'm going to go ahead and put a plus blank, but I'm going to add the 4 over to the other side. Okay, why is this ugly? Well, is 13 divisible by 2? We're going to have to use a fraction. Okay, so to factor this, we're going to have x plus half of 13. I would like you to just write 13 over 2, please. Then we're supposed to square it. 13 over 2 times 13 over 2. Anybody know what 13 times 13 is? 169. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, we got that. Again, it was 13 over 2 times 13 over 2. We were squaring it. We ended up with 169 over 4. Whatever we put in that one, we got to put in this one. So much uglier when it's not an even number. Okay, somebody type on their calculator for us, please. 4 plus 169 divided by 4. And then do a math, enter, enter. Thank you. Next step. This is where you should be able to go from here. We square root both sides. The left side, we just lose the squared. The squared and square root undo each other. On the right side, we need to remember a plus or minus. Now, this is a little review for you. Remember, this really means square root of 185 over square root of 4. What's the square root of 4? 2, which is great because you can't have a square root in the denominator, and we don't. The square root of 185, can anybody divide that by 5 for me? I think it's 35? 37, okay. If this factors 5 and 37, are either of those perfect squares? No, so we get to just leave this square root of 185. Thank goodness, right? Last step. Subtract the 13 halves over to the other side, and we can't combine it. So we end up with x equals negative 13 halves plus or minus the square root of 185 over 2. And we're just going to leave that disgusting answer. And because I'm really not that worried about completing the square yet, I do hereby solemnly swear I will not put on the quiz with an odd number. Okay? Deal? All right. Now we're just going to do factoring. Yay, we're already good at this. Okay? We're going to solve by factoring. Do you know the reason it works to solve by factoring? The whole reason factoring works is because of what's called the zero product property. The only way to make 0 is one of the things have to be 0 when you multiply, yes? The only way to get to 0 when you are multiplying is if one of them is 0. That's why factoring works. So we're going to make this a multiplication problem by factoring out a 4x. What's left? Anybody? 2, okay. Now, we can treat this as 2 or 3 multiplications. I'm just going to treat it as 2. You could take the 4 separately. But if I write 4x equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0, if I divide both sides by 4, I just get 0 as one of my solutions, right? By the way, can 4 equal 0? 4 does not equal 0, right? So don't try to separate that. If you wrote 4 equals 0, x equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0, This is not true, so that gets thrown away. You get 0 and 2. Going to add 2 to both sides. Do I need to show my work there? Everybody okay? All right, let's move on. You guys are good at factoring. I hope we're getting there. Factors that make -9. 3 and 3 are 9 and 1, which is going to make 8 in the middle. We need a 9 and a 1 to make an x squared out front. We have an x and an x. Remember, the whole thing is we got to check the middle two terms here. Let's see. A -9 and a +1 would give me -9x plus 1x, which would give me the -8 in the middle. We all good? I'm just showing my check. You don't have to do that. Then you do each one of these could be 0. And you get x equals 9 and x equals -1. Everybody okay? Feel like you've been doing those kind for a while? No? Maybe? There's really 2 ways you could solve number 9. You could add 49 over to the other side and square root it. But sometimes when students do that, they forget that there's 2 solutions. If we factored it, would you remember that x could be 7 or -7? It actually works if you just put it over to the other side and square root, as long as you remember it means x equals plus or minus 7. I don't care which way you do it. Too fast? Do you remember difference of squares? X squared minus 49, both perfect squares to get x plus 7, x minus 7. All right. The big deal here on 10, 11, and 12 is you cannot factor anything until it equals 0. Factoring only works for the zero product property, which means you have to have a 0. It has to equal 0. So if we subtract 10 over to this side, we get a 3x squared minus an x and a minus 10. Remember, we're trying to write it in ax squared plus bx plus c equals, that's our order. We want the constant at the end. Okay. To get a 3x squared, this is where some of you struggle with the factoring. I know. Take your time. 3x squared would be what? 3x and a 1x, right? That's not too bad. What do you want to try to get a 10? 1 and 10 or 2 and 5? I usually don't start with the 1 and 10s. If we put a 2 and a 5, we don't know that that order is a good plan, right? Right now I have a 2x and a 15x when I multiply here. Is that going to give me a 1 in the middle? What do you want to try next? Switch them around. I switched the 2 and 5, so this didn't work. Now I have a 5x and a 6x. That sounds promising, right? To get a -10, I need one of them to be negative, and I want a -1 in the middle. So if the 6 was negative, my negative would be back here. Now, the answers are not -5 and 2. I always get somebody who just looks at this and says you take the opposite of this number back here, but that's not how that works, right? You have to say this quantity could equal 0, or this quantity could equal 0. So 2 is 1, but what happens here? I hope you won't need to show all this work eventually, but we get -5/3 and +2 are the 2 solutions. Did someone else get that, or did I lose a brain cell somewhere? Okay. What time are we done, guys? 16, thank you, sorry. I think I'll skip 11. I'll just do 12 with you. What can we do on 12? What do we have to do first? Move the 3 over, yep. So we end up with 2x squared minus x minus 3. So we're going to have a 2x and a 1x. The only factors of 3 are 3 and 1. Do you want to try 1, 3 or 3, 1 first? Remember, this one's going to get multiplied by a 2. So is putting a 3 back here would make that a 6, right? I think I'll try the 3 here and the 1 here. So right now I get a 2x, and in the middle I get a 3x. I want it to be a -1, so I want the 3 to be negative. If it takes you a while to FOIL that all out and figure it out, it's okay. Then you set each one equal to 0. You would add 3 over the other side, divide by 2. Please don't give me decimals. And this one you just subtract 1. I didn't show quite as much work that time. Is everybody still okay? All right, then I think there's a little section that says, what does it seem best? What do you want to try on what does it seem best for 13? This does not have an x, right? So I'm thinking we could just isolate the x squared. So I'm going to add the 24 over to the other side. And I get x squared equals, is that 40, guys? Then if I square root, 2 things to worry about this time. Always worry about what? The plus or minus. X squared indicates 2 solutions when you see an x squared. Unless it's the same solution twice, it's always got 2 solutions. Now, I get plus or minus the square root of 40. Did anybody do the delta math yesterday? There was a few little review of radical simplification. Square root of 4, square root of 10. What's the square root of 4? 2 square roots of 10. Now, this is a multiplication, so the plus or minus just goes out front. Don't write 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. That means something totally different, okay? This is a positive 2 square roots of 10 and a negative 2 square roots of 10. All right, 14, what are you thinking? I would just do factoring. Can I skip that one? Factors of 14 are like 7 and 2, right? We could do that one. What would you do first on 15? I would take out a 3. X squared plus 4x. Is this the same problem I did earlier? I don't know. It's the one I divided wrong, right? 63 divided by 3 is 21. Or I multiplied it. I don't know what I did wrong earlier. Okay. Now, does this 3 out front, is this a solution? Do you understand when I say 3 is a factor and one of these factors has to equal 0? This one, or this one. But can 3 equal 0? No. So you just, this is gone. You don't have to worry about it. If there's an x out there, that's another story. But if there's a constant, it cannot equal 0. All right, now we're worried about in here. X plus 7 and x minus 3. Does that seem right to anybody? I need a positive 4 though, right? Plus 7 and minus. Did I make a sign mistake somewhere? Okay. If you wrote your parentheses, x minus 3 and x plus 7, that's fine. Doesn't matter what order you write them in. I don't know who said it was opposite. Is everybody okay now? We figure out what. Okay. So now when x plus 7 equals 0, negative 7 is the solution. And x minus 3 equals 0 would mean positive 3. So x equals negative 7 or positive 3. Okay, last thing. Anybody remember what we want to do here? Go back and look at maybe number 3. Was it number 3? When we have a quantity that's squared, we don't want to do a bunch of extra work if we can help it. Just ignore this for a minute. What does your Algebra 1 brain tell you to do when you see 7 blank, 7 somethings minus 12? Add the 12. I still have 7 somethings, but now I have what, 77? Then don't distribute, can't distribute because of the squared. There's no such thing as distributing a squared. You'd have to FOIL it all out. Gross, gross, gross. What could we do instead to get rid of 7 times something? Now I can square root. As soon as I do, I got to remember a plus or minus. X minus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 11. Add 2 over there. And this time we are adding, not multiplying, so we end up with a positive 2 and a plus or minus square root of 11. If you had a teacher that made you write that out. On delta math, it will take either, I believe, okay? I think there's a plus or minus you can use on some of them. Otherwise, you just, anytime delta math doesn't give you enough boxes to put your answers in, just use a comma, okay? Like if your answers were 7 and -3, you do 7, -3, and it'll bring up a box. I know some people have already done the delta math for this whole week, so some people got too much time for math fun, huh? All right, so the assignment is a delta math called Solving Quadratic Equations, Factoring, and More. There were also 2 delta maths assigned earlier. One was on factoring, and one was the after quiz review of exponent rules and simplifying radicals. Okay, start out tomorrow with questions, okay? Tomorrow, make sure you have a charged Chromebook. We are going to